Tightrope walking isn't just for circus acts. It's been attempted on mountains, city skylines, and makeshift setups. But whether expert or amateur, one misstep brings the same end, a fatal fall. In this video, we uncover 6 of the most horrifying tightrope walking deaths ever recorded. It was October 3rd, 2015, in Brooklyn, New York. The narrow alleys of Bushwick were quiet in the early morning. The streets seemed calm, but above them, a single decision set off a chain of moments that neighbors would remember long after the night ended. Victor Ramirez, 29, worked long hours in kitchens across the borough. He washed dishes at a diner in the mornings and took a second shift at a bar in the evenings. His income kept him afloat, but left little margin. Friends described him as confident to the point of carelessness, someone who enjoyed pushing limits. In his free time, he liked demonstrating balance tricks, walking laundry lines behind buildings, or climbing onto roofs where others hesitated to go. The rooftops in his neighborhood offered shortcuts between blocks, and Victor had turned them into his own path home. The buildings were mostly old brick walk-ups, patched with tar and flashing. Lines of cable, pipes, and rusted rails crisscrossed the gaps between structures. They were never meant to bear weight, but Victor saw them as an alternative to staircases and sidewalks. He had shown friends his route before, laughing at the danger. To him, it was routine, but it depended entirely on luck and grip. That night, he finished his second shift just after 2 a.m. and left with a coworker. Instead of following him down the stairs to the street, Victor led him up to the roof access door. The plan was to cross between buildings rather than circle around the block. A tensioned utility line stretched between 2 rooftops, fixed to rooftop hardware. It sagged slightly from years of tension, narrow and slick from condensation. The co-worker, used to Victor's shortcuts, leaned casually against the wall and waited, unaware that the air carried a damp chill that made every surface just a little less forgiving. The first steps went smoothly. He crouched low, arms out, moving slowly along the cable. His shoes pressed into the thin steel, which flexed slightly under his weight. At the halfway point, the cable twitched, shifting against its anchors. The motion threw off his rhythm. The coworker later described how Victor froze, then bent his knees deeper to regain stability. For a moment, it looked as if he might recover, but his arms flailed as the cable oscillated. Witnesses on the street below heard a brief yell, followed by the heavy sound of impact. Victor had slipped forward, his body twisting as he lost grip. He struck the pavement of the narrow alley head first, the collision leaving him motionless. Blood pooled beneath his head, where he struck the pavement. The coworker rushed down the stairs screaming for help, but there was little anyone could do. Police and paramedics arrived within minutes, securing the area with tape while neighbors leaned from windows. Victor was pronounced dead at the scene. The fall distance, about 30 feet, had caused massive blunt force trauma. No drugs were found on him, though investigators noted alcohol in his system, consistent with his shift ending at a bar. An autopsy later confirmed his cause of death as a skull fracture with associated brain trauma. In the days following, locals remembered him as daring but reckless. Friends admitted they had seen him take similar shortcuts many times, calling it only a matter of time. Authorities classified the death as an accident, noting that rooftop crossings were not uncommon in the neighborhood, but remained extremely unsafe. Victor Ramirez's case was closed within a week. No further action was taken, but property owners in the area reinforced access doors to discourage similar incidents. It was June 18th, 2016, in London, United Kingdom. The summer air was bright and clear, company banners flapping lightly above a courtyard where staff gathered for a charity event. The setting was festive, but behind the cheers and music, one participant's overconfidence would turn the day into an incident that left colleagues shaken. Melissa Carter, 37, worked as an accountant for a mid-sized financial services firm. She had built a reputation inside the office for her sharp competitiveness and frequent belittling of others. Colleagues described her as ambitious and abrasive, someone who sought to prove superiority whenever possible. Outside of work, she had no history in athletics, yet she enjoyed showcasing boldness in social settings. For Melissa, the fundraiser presented less a chance to support a cause than an opportunity to assert dominance over peers. The event featured a series of games and challenges on the company grounds, staged to raise money for a local hospital. Staff volunteers had arranged simple activities, including a low balance beam for participants to walk across while co-workers cheered. For safety, optional nets and mats were provided. The terrain itself was controlled, a flat courtyard with temporary scaffolding and platforms assembled for the demonstrations. It was intended to be a light-hearted environment, requiring no special training. When Melissa's turn came, she rejected the balance beam entirely. She insisted a rope be strung between two scaffolding posts at a height of about 15 feet. Her co-workers objected, pointing out that the stunt was unnecessary and riskier than anything planned. Safety mats and a net were offered, but she dismissed them, calling those who used them weak. The request was not part of the schedule, but under pressure, a few staff reluctantly improvised, tying a rope taut between the posts. From the ground, the rope swayed lightly in the breeze, thinner and less stable than anything meant for this type of performance. As she climbed the scaffolding, co-workers exchanged uneasy looks. Some suggested stopping the attempt, but Melissa waved them off, smirking as she positioned herself at the edge. With dozens of eyes on her, she stepped onto the rope. For a few seconds, she appeared steady, one foot in front of the other, arms extended for balance. Staff clapped half-heartedly, but the atmosphere carried more tension than celebration. Halfway across, the rope shifted beneath her shoe. Witnesses later described how her expression changed instantly from smug confidence to alarm. She slipped sideways, grabbing at the rope to catch herself. The force twisted her wrist sharply, leaving her hanging for barely a second before gravity took control. She fell hard against the scaffolding frame, her torso striking the metal crossbar with full weight before she hit the ground below. The impact was loud enough to draw gasps from the crowd. Several witnesses recalled the thud and the way her body folded on contact, convinced it meant broken ribs and internal damage. Blood spread from her mouth as her lungs filled, visible even to those at the back of the courtyard. Several staff members rushed forward, while others turned away. Her chest showed no normal movement, and the blood in her airway left little doubt of catastrophic trauma. But panic drove the event's first aid team to begin chest compressions anyway. Emergency services arrived within minutes, called by one of the staff. Yet by the time she was loaded into the ambulance, she was unresponsive. Melissa Carter was pronounced dead at the hospital that same afternoon. In the following weeks, bitterness outweighed sympathy. Many employees openly remarked that Melissa's arrogance had caused her own death, and some admitted they felt little grief over the outcome. While a small plaque was installed in the office lobby, it was largely ignored, with several staff privately calling it undeserved. It was September 9th, 2017, in Santa Fe, New Mexico. The historic plaza was alive with music and dancing as the annual fiesta reached its evening peak. Lanterns flickered against the adobe walls, and the air carried a blend of roasted chile and beer. Crowds pressed around the stage, unaware that the night's energy would be broken by a miscalculation that ended in disaster. Antonio Delgado was 51, a lifelong resident of Santa Fe, known for his woodworking and deep ties to local cultural events. He had earned modest recognition at community fairs for carving furniture in traditional Spanish colonial style. He was known to be proud, stubborn, and prone to drinking heavily at public gatherings. Antonio saw the fiesta not only as heritage, but as a stage to prove himself. Risk did not deter him. If anything, it amplified his sense of bravado. In earlier years, he volunteered for demonstrations, carving, knotting, storytelling, but lately pushed for more daring displays. The rope walk was one of these, drawn from folklore rather than history. Without sponsors or proper gear, he improvised. 2 poles braced in sand-filled barrels and a hemp rope strung between them, with only the brick plaza below. That evening, after hours of drinking, Antonio declared he would perform the rope walk in front of the stage. Onlookers attempted to dissuade him, pointing out the instability of the setup and his unsteady condition. Festival staff were occupied with scheduled performers and allowed him space, assuming it would amount to little more than showmanship. Antonio, bottle still in hand, climbed onto the makeshift platform. The rope sagged under his weight, visibly uneven, but he treated the instability as part of the display. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as he steadied himself, muttering that he could handle it. A few clapped hesitantly, though the majority watched in tense silence. Each step sent the rope bouncing, his shoes slipping slightly against the fibers. Witnesses described him shifting his arms in wide arcs, more to keep balance than to perform. From below, the sway of his body was erratic, his coordination evidently dulled by alcohol. About a third of the way across, his foot slipped sharply. He lurched sideways, the bottle slipping from his grip as his free arm scraped along the rope. The crowd gasped as he toppled into open air, his body twisting toward the edge of the plaza. The fall ended in seconds. He landed hard among the spectators, his wrist slamming against a stone bench with a crack audible even through the music. His head struck the plaza bricks immediately after, producing a hollow, unmistakable sound. Witnesses close to the impact described blood pooling almost instantly, spreading across the uneven stones. Shouts of panic cut through the festival music as people backed away. Volunteers forced through the crowd and laid him flat, a few trying compressions while others stood back. Paramedics arrived within minutes from a nearby staging area, but Antonio never regained consciousness. Despite their efforts, the combined head and chest trauma was irreversible, and he was pronounced dead within the hour at a local hospital. The fiesta was halted for about 20 minutes as organizers cleared the plaza and calmed the crowd. Music eventually returned, though in a restrained, uneasy rhythm that never recaptured the earlier energy. Vendors reported slower business than usual, with many families leaving earlier than planned. By the following day, the atmosphere of the celebration was described as muted, with conversations repeatedly circling back to the spectacle that had overshadowed the night. It was October 22nd, 2016, in Toronto, Canada. The air outside carried the chill of late fall, but inside an abandoned warehouse, the quiet was broken by the hum of camera equipment and scattered voices. A group of film students were working on a scene they hoped would impress jurors at an upcoming student festival. But by night's end, their project would be overshadowed by a fatal accident. Ethan Marsh was 25, a third-year film student with a reputation for chasing authenticity over safety. He had grown up on action movies, studying the raw energy of practical stunts, and believed audiences could always spot a fake. Classmates described him as abrasive, often dismissing suggestions he saw as timid. He wanted recognition, not just as a director, but as someone willing to risk himself for realism. Sponsors and faculty offered no funding for this project. Ethan scraped together equipment rentals through savings and student credit. The warehouse offered the kind of gritty backdrop he favored: exposed steel beams, concrete floors, and high windows leaking late daylight. For Ethan, the environment was a stage. The scene called for a chase, one character escaping by sprinting across a rope suspended high above the floor. Commercial crews would have built platforms, nets, and safety harnesses. Ethan had none of these. His classmates objected, suggesting camera tricks or editing cheats, but he dismissed them. He insisted the shot would only work if the actor, in this case himself, crossed the rope without precautions. That Saturday, they carried in a heavy coil of rope and fixed it between two parallel steel beams about 18 feet off the ground. The knots were rushed, pulled tight, but without professional rigging hardware. Classmates suggested lowering the setup or using a balance beam on the ground, but Ethan waved it off. With the daylight fading, he was more concerned about losing the look he wanted than about safety. As the cameras rolled, tension built. The crew shifted uneasily, waiting for Ethan to climb. He mounted one of the beams using a ladder, positioning himself with the rope stretched taut in front of him. The rope sagged slightly under his weight before he even placed both feet on it. One crew member muttered that it didn't look secure. Ethan steadied himself, spread his arms, and called for the take to begin. However, almost immediately through his first step, the rope twisted unexpectedly. Witnesses later recalled the sound of fibers straining as Ethan crouched, trying to regain balance. He grinned at the cameras and mouthed something, then shifted forward. But the second step proved fatal. His shoe slipped on the rope's fraying surface, and his body pitched sideways. The fall lasted only a moment. From nearly 20 feet up, he landed hard on his back with a dull thud that echoed through the warehouse. At first, he tried to breathe, but his chest barely rose, and within seconds, his body went limp. Crew members screamed and dropped equipment, rushing to him as it became clear he was unresponsive. Attempts at resuscitation began immediately, the urgency rising when he failed to respond to chest compressions. A stagehand grabbed a phone and dialed emergency services while others cleared space around him. Paramedics arrived within minutes, noting a faint pulse and believing at first he might survive, since there were no obvious external injuries. They worked quickly to stabilize him before rushing him to the hospital. Doctors fought to keep him alive for several hours, but the internal bleeding could not be controlled. He was pronounced dead later that evening in the trauma unit, the autopsy later confirming a partial tear of the aorta as the cause. Police questioned the crew, but determined the event accidental, citing lack of safety protocols and alcohol-free conditions. In the aftermath, the project collapsed. The footage, including the moments leading to Ethan's fall, was seized by faculty and placed under lock, deemed too disturbing to be used or screened. Several crew members withdrew from the film program entirely, shaken by the experience and unwilling to continue. It was June 30th, 2018, in Key West, Florida. The harbor lights flickered across the dark water, casting unsteady reflections between boats swaying in the humid night air. By midnight, the mood shifted from celebration to recklessness, and what began as a harmless dare would unravel into something irreversible. Todd Jenkins, 32, had worked for years as a yacht mechanic in Monroe County. His reputation on the docks was built on speed and strength. He could strip and repair an engine faster than most, and he was known for pushing limits off the clock as well. Nights usually ended in bars, where he picked fights or pulled stunts to prove himself tougher than anyone else. Friends saw it as bravado covering frustration. Todd drank heavily, but he also craved an audience, especially when younger co-workers began mocking him as past his prime. Risk, for him, was never separate from pride. Though not tied to any sponsors or organizations, his life revolved around Key West's marina culture. Mechanics, captains, and crew all shared the same bars and boats, their reputations carried by word of mouth. Todd lived for attention in that small circle. The environment itself fed his impulses. Boats with slick decks, jagged cleats, and heavy gear made for both a workplace and a playground when alcohol blurred judgment. He had walked dock railings before, balancing while friends cheered, but never under the glow of a party boat filled with strangers. That night's charter began like any other. The group drank rum while a stereo blasted classic rock. Todd had already downed several cups before he tied a thick rope between the boat's bow railing and a wooden piling at the dock. The makeshift bridge sagged with tension, but he insisted he would cross it like a pirate, his shirt off, sweat shining under floodlights. Passengers laughed nervously. Some cheered him on, while others warned the rope was slick and unstable. The captain objected but didn't intervene, distracted by keeping the boat steady against the dock and the tide. Todd stepped onto the rope barefoot, his arms stretched wide for balance, body swaying with the pull of the line. Passengers crowded the bow, cell phones up, recording. The rope bounced with every step. He grinned, soaking in the attention, and staggered forward as if performing. Then his foot slipped against the wet line. He lurched sideways, arms flailing. Witnesses recalled him hitting the metal railing on his way down with a sharp thud before splashing into the black water below. At first, the crowd thought it was another stunt. Then blood spread quickly on the surface. He had slashed his wrist against a jagged cleat welded to the hull near the bow. In the floodlights, the water churned red. Todd thrashed, striking out with his good arm, but his movements weakened almost immediately. His head dipped under once, then again, longer each time. The music stopped, replaced by screams. Several passengers threw life rings, but the current pulled him just out of reach. The captain alerted the authorities. One man jumped in but struggled in the turbulence and was hauled back aboard. Within less than a minute, Todd's arm stopped moving. His body rolled once with the tide before disappearing under the boat. By the time the Coast Guard arrived, Divers were needed to retrieve him. His body was found near the piling, limp and pale, wrist torn open, blood diluted into the harbor. The Coast Guard's report later cited alcohol, unsafe conditions, and disregard for warnings. No charges were filed against the crew or captain. The case was marked closed within days. Todd's funeral was held a week later at a small church in Key West. The pews filled mostly with dock workers, mechanics, and longtime locals. A handful of co-workers shared short memories of his skill in the shop, but few spoke of the night itself. For most, it was less a shock than a grim confirmation of where his habits had led. It was August 19, 2017, in Orlando, Florida. The theme park had just closed, the bright music silenced, and rides stilled, leaving the grounds in artificial twilight. Maintenance crews moved in behind the departing crowds, but in one corner of the park, a group of seasonal employees lingered where they should not have been. Brianna Lowell was 19, a seasonal hire working concessions and occasionally assigned to crowd control near rides. Friends knew her as bold and mocking of authority, often slipping into staff-only areas for thrills. She was restless, ambitious, and dismissive of rules, bragging that she would one day leave the job behind for something more exciting. Risk was part of her personality. Peer attention mattered. The area she entered was meant only for trained staff, service platforms, catwalks, and cables above heavy machinery. It was narrow, dimly lit, and crowded with beams, gears, and drive systems, all marked with warnings about crushing hazards. To Brianna, those signs looked more like dares. On that night, she and 4 friends slipped past a gate after closing. They gathered beneath the skeleton of a roller coaster, where floodlights cast sharp shadows over steel beams. Brianna spotted a thick service rope tied between 2 access points above a cluster of machinery. Laughing, she told the others she would walk across it. They urged her to stop, pointing out the drop in the gears below, but she waved them off. Alcohol, smuggled earlier in the shift, had lowered her judgment further. She climbed onto the rope, balancing barefoot. The line sagged under her weight, her arms spread wide as she inched forward. Her friends stood on the platform, torn between nervous laughter and genuine fear. The rope swayed with each movement. Halfway across, she turned her head to grin back at them. In that moment, her foot slipped against the rope's fibers and she fell. Her friends later described her striking a beam before plunging into the mechanical pit. She landed in the gears of an idle drive assembly, and the force crushed her chest on impact. Her scream was short, cut off by the grinding sound of her body striking metal. One friend bolted toward security while the others fled, sobbing and panicked. Security staff arrived instantaneously, finding Brianna unresponsive, pinned awkwardly between beams. Blood had pooled beneath her and spread across the machinery. Her body was recovered only after maintenance workers disassembled part of the structure. The autopsy later confirmed massive blunt force trauma to the chest as the cause of death. Behind closed doors, security staff who witnessed the recovery admitted the scene was among the worst they had encountered. Details were withheld from the public, but among employees, the story circulated quietly as a reminder of how quickly recklessness could end in disaster. Thanks for watching. If you're into stories of attention seekers whose stunts ended fatally, click here for more.